So welcome back to another episode of Super Progressive, and we're super stoked today because joining us is Stacey Pullen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, what's been up, man? You're live from the studio?
Yeah, I'm live from the studio. I'm taking a little break from secret project I got coming out at the end of the year. I'm working on an EP for a company, actually a US based company. You'll find out more about it pretty soon, but I can't make any noise about it right now.
Dude, that's awesome. Love that energy. We're gonna talk about all about your career and all about Detroit. I think our relationship with you, Super Progressive's relationship with you, started a couple Wednesdays ago. We got to see you in Los Angeles at Clinic, and you crushed it, man. It was awesome.
Yeah. Coming out to LA is really interesting because I've been out there. I don't come out there a lot, but it's once a year, maybe. So far, it's been two times this year, which is great, And I like playing for the LA crowd, It's just that, I wanted coming out there. The first time I went out there was in 1995, which was for the Transmat tour with myself and Derek May and a bunch of other Detroit DJs. And that was my first time out to LA, and it was a really cool experience. Playing for the LA crowd is, they want the Detroit sound. They hungry for it. Over these past few years, it's been basically progressing. You got the underground scene, you got the club scene. I just sort of go out there and do what I do, and and gets the smiles on people's faces, and followers, and fill the pulse of the universe, fill the pulse of what's going on out there.
So we're here today. I think it's a perfect segue. We're here today to learn all about the history of Detroit and the history of underground dance music there. I think the first question I'd like to ask you, and I think we can either talk about the history of your career first or the history of Detroit first, but in your memory, what is the first record that you remember consciously going into a shop and buying?
From the Detroit techno perspective, well, see, the thing about it is that Jeff Mills was on the radio back when I was in high school, a teenager, and he played some of everything. He played Detroit techno, he played Ital disco, he played hip hop. My first track that I specifically bought was a Model 500 record. It was No UFOs, and the flip side was Future. And then I remember buying a Transmat record, X-Ray. That was in 1985. And that was the year that I started DJing, actually. And I just remember hearing those songs. Jeff Mills was playing them on the radio. Electrifying Mojo, which was a very influential DJ and personality, sort of like the George Clinton of DJs. He would come on with 15-minute introductions with the spaceship landing, playing this crazy music that I was just so mesmerized by the sound and the whole movement. And Detroit techno was just beginning at that time. Going to the stores and listening to what they were playing on the radio, that's how you got a chance to feel what the DJs were playing and feel what Detroit techno was all about. So it was basically a Model 500, which was Juan Atkins, and it was Transmat, which was Derek May's label, and a artist called X-Ray. So those were the two first tracks that I bought that were considered Detroit techno.
Awesome. And can you kind of go into a little bit about the history of, you name some individuals, and it sounds like you have a pretty close relationship with, Derek May, Juan Atkins, Kevin Saunderson, the Bellevue Three. Can you kind of tell us like the definitive history of this early techno first wave?
Well, those guys, they started off playing football and as friends, Derek and Kevin. They started off as friends out in Bellevue, and they were athletes pretty much, you know. And they basically met Juan from a mutual friend, and they were all friends in high school. And, you know, Juan had these keyboards in his bedroom, and he ran, he had a group called Cybertron, and which is basically the very first techno group, or that made it, you know, nationally recognized, you know. Juan Atkins had equipment in this room, and he invited Derek, and, you know, he told Kevin, and, you know, the story goes on as, you know, once they introduced to Juan made them forget about the sports, you know. They pretty much, they created this movement that they didn't know that it was going to be so influential out the world, you know. Juan Atkins, he did the group called Cybertron, which was more electro based. It wasn't geared towards the dance floor, but we were also inspired by groups like Kraftwerk, Tangerine Dream, Devo, even Depeche Mode, you know, because they were electronic groups that, I mean, rock groups that had an electronic feel. And, you know, it was based on synthesizers. Kraftwerk was based on technology, the future, and mesmerized by space and time, you know. And so these guys sort of started making their own labels. You know, Juan Atkins had, he had Model 500, Derek May had Transmat, and Kevin had KMS Records, you know. And Kevin's first big hit was Good Life and Big Fun, which was world renowned all over the world. Derek May was Strings of Life, which was one of his biggest hits. And Juan Atkins, he was doing more underground things, but he was more influential with the electro scene, which was No UFOs, what else? Cybertron, like I said, you know, even Missy Elliott sampled one of Cybertron tracks, you know? So, you know, I hope he got paid with the publishing with that, though.
So cool. One question I have initially is, like, outside of radio, how were kids like you experiencing this music coming from Detroit?
Well, we used to have these cliques, you know. It was based on fashion. It was based on who can play the hottest tracks, the best mixes. And, you know, and we all would go to these parties. You know, the girls were there, the guys was looking good. You know, we were all preppy, like we were going out for a day in golf, you know. So it was one of those things where we went out with a chip on our shoulder because we were into this music that was very eclectic, you know, because back then it was only rap, R&B, Run DMC was coming out, Fat Boys, LL Cool J. But we, the Black community, underground community, which was, you know, we were called preppy guys, you know, and we would listen to these songs that, you know, other DJs would play. We were influenced by Chicago as well, you know, which was 4 hours away. So we would, you know, play 15-minute sets at these parties, and whoever got the most crowd response was considered the winner, if you will, on that night's, you know, party pumping, you know, guy who was sort of that made the party, you know, kind of go off, you know. So we were influenced by each other, going to the record stores, like I said. But it was more of it was a fashion statement too, you know. It was like the art scene in the 80s in New York, you know. We all had cliques. We all were influenced by each other. We kept it underground. It was played on the radio a little, but it was more of a scene that we felt good that we had something that nobody else had, you know, because this music is not for everyone. Techno music, the Detroit sound, you know. I remember a couple of people asking me, do you actually listen to like every hi-hat or kick drum or the way it's tuned and the 16th notes that was that, and I say, yeah, this is what makes our music so special because, everything was so precise. We had to get everything, even though the beautiful mistakes happened, but we listened to our music and critiqued it so much that we wanted to perfect our craft as well.
You talked about this like chip on your shoulder energy and this underground energy surrounding the scene. One thing I read that was really interesting to me, especially because of the DJs we've already interviewed, is that you said this music was originally called progressive music in Detroit, but now the term progressive has a completely different understanding in the music industry. But can you talk a little bit about that? How like what progressive originally meant to this underground crowd?
Progressive back in the days, it meant it was basically I would say another way of looking at music, it was a futuristic progressive avenue that took us to different places. It was European music that really got inspired, that, like I said, Italian disco. And it was a progressive way of thinking about the music that we made, the music that we played, a visionary visionary way of thinking about the music that inspired us. So that's what we sort of made this thing called progressive music because it was so far ahead, and we knew that we didn't know how long it was going to take us to sort of have this global impact, but we knew that it was something different other than the norm versus listening to the radio, listening to pop music like Madonna's on the radio. MTV was the first. MTV was out at that time, and a lot of people were influenced by them, but we were influenced by more of a progressive way of thinking about the music that we was listening and making at the same time.
What is the magic of this relationship between Detroit and the future based in? Why is it a city that has this underground community that looks to the future for inspiration?
Definitely because of the car industry. Detroit is the motor city. We put the first cars in motion. Those guys who built the cars were visionaries for the future. They knew what they had, and they sort of made the wheels turn, if you will. So we always, our parents, you had people who migrated from all parts of the world to come to Detroit to work in the car industries that was built by themselves and machines and robots and technology, especially now, but even so then back in the day. So Detroit's always had that futuristic mentality where we wanted to take things and ideas into the future. Same goes with the music. You have the Motown sound, that when you hear that snare drum from the Temptations or the Supremes or Marvin Gaye, you heard that Motown sound from that studio, and Detroit's techno was always the same as well, because we had all of our tracks cut at the same mastering studio in Detroit. So you bring all those things together and you have this one big conglomerate of Detroit inspirations, Detroit vision that influenced the world. And that was years ago and up until now, So we live in an industrial city as well, with the car automotive plants and, hearing different machines, go when they're making cars or whatever. So this was also influenced in our music and our mentality to sort of go forward to its future.
It's so cool that connection between the city's identity as a car manufacturer and the music that comes out of the city. It's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear, I mean, these robots in the plants and the car manufacturers, you know, they have these repetitive beats as well. These repetitive, you know, you got to stamp the car, and then you got to go over to the next line, and you hear this, and these people do that. And there's a rhythm in there somewhere, you know, that subliminally, you know, is the lifeline and the blood and soul and heart and soul of what we do.
So it sounds like these sounds went from the factories into the underground, where they were almost synthesized by musicians and played at these underground parties. But then they eventually make it into the clubs. And I would like to ask you kind of about the early club scene in Detroit, because through my research, the one thing I see is the Music Institute. And that is like the Paradise Garage of New York, or like the Warehouse in Chicago. But can you talk a little bit about the Music Institute, and then if there's important clubs preceding that, what those clubs were?
So when the Music Institute was established, I was in Tennessee I was in college at the time. And I came home for a weekend to visit my parents, and a friend of mine told me, oh, it's this new club called the Music Institute. You know, they play techno. And that's all he told me. He's like, it's a members only club. It's a members only club. They don't serve alcohol. It's an after hours. You should come, but you have to have a card to get in. So I don't know how I got a card, or he had a couple extra ones. And it was a membership only. I had to fill this card out, you know. And so I went, and I got to the front door, and all I saw was a strobe light and just the music just pumping. You know, I'm familiar with Detroit techno, but I wasn't into the scene then. I'm still a student, you know, and I'm 800 miles away in Tennessee going to school. So I get into the club, and it's just one strobe light. The DJ's up top, and you can see the sweat on the walls, people dancing. It didn't matter who you were, race, creed, or color. People were dancing with the speaker. You could dance by yourself. It was a non-threatening type of atmosphere where you can go in and just sort of lose yourself. And I remember I went on a Friday night. Derek D-Win was playing, Dura Win, which was resident on Friday. And then Derek May was resident on Friday as well. So 2 DJs. And I just remember looking up at the top where the DJ was on the second floor, and just seeing and hearing this music that was blowing me away. You know, playing music on vinyl, cassette, reel to reel, anything that can possibly get your hands on, where they were coming straight from the studio with the reels in there. I remember waiting in the parking lot and seeing Derek May and Carl Craig coming straight from the studio with a reel to reel in their hand, ready to play their release, or ready to play the track that you just made an hour ago, you know? And I saw that, and I said to myself, this is what I want, you know? And they're coming in, you know, they're wearing t-shirts and blue jeans, running their own companies, you know, the studio, the club, the scene was just so, yeah, I was into it, you know? So the Music Institute on Friday nights was techno. Saturday nights were more of the housey Chicago disco vibe, you know, with Alton Miller and Shay Demir. And I went a few nights there too, but my Friday nights with me was the techno, you know. So fast forward a couple of months later, I would come home just to go to that club. Now, I'm in Tennessee, and I used to drive home
every weekend.
Huh?
You used to make the drive like on a Friday morning all the way back?
Yeah, I would. Well, we would leave class 2:00 in the afternoon, you know, and we would make it in to Detroit 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And at this time, the radio, we had Jeff Mills, we had Kevin Saunderson, we had a couple other local music jocks that was on the radio. They all had their radio shows at the time. And coming home on a Friday night and hearing the Detroit techno, Big Fun, Good Life, Strings of Life, Chicago house music, it was it just sent chills in the spine, And, we would go straight to the club, from driving 8 hours and hang out there until 5 or 6 in the morning. Then we would go home and see our parents for a bit, pick up some whatever we were going to pick up, and then make the drive back to Tennessee on that Sunday so we could be in school Monday.
Did you have a friend you were doing with this, or is this solo missions?
Oh no, I had a friend. Yeah. But see, I was the only one who was into the music. Those guys were coming home to see family, but my mission was go to the club.
Got it.
That was my mission.
It's awesome. So, I kind of have 2 questions, and I guess I don't know, you can tell me if I'm jumping ahead too far, but at what moment, so you're saying this music is like your life and it's leaving a huge impact on you and inspiring you so much. What moment were you like, okay, this is more than just something I want to take from, I want to give back to? Like, what moment did you start producing your own music or mixing for crowds outside of your high school parties? What stage did you take the plunge into contributing to the scene?
I was still in Tennessee at the time. I was in my 2nd year in college. My roommates and I, we went in and bought a drum machine and a keyboard. It was a Yamaha drum machine and a Casio keyboard. And we were just kind of fooling around. We were always DJs. So we bought these 2 machines together thinking that we were going to do this hip hop group, because at that time, hip hop was great. It still is, but we had a couple of producers down there that were looking for a hip hop group. We had some friends from New York, Chicago, and then me from Detroit and another guy from Detroit. So we bought this equipment thinking that, we're going to do this hip hop thing. But on the side, when the practice was finished, I would stay at the kitchen table at our apartment that we had. And those guys would go out and have fun, go to the college parties. And I'll be at the kitchen table mimicking each Detroit techno record that I can. I would do the drum tracks. I would program the drum tracks precisely as what I heard in the record. And I would be sitting there for hours. And those guys would go out, come back 3 hours later. I'll be still sitting at the table, programming these beats. And those guys were my roommates. They couldn't believe that, I hadn't had anything to eat. So once I would program these beats, I would listen to it. Then I would listen to the record that I mimicked from. I would go back again. So I would go back and forth, and I'm like, okay, this sounds a complete replica of what I'm hearing in the record, and I'm like, okay, I can do this. I'm a drummer anyways, so I was in the band. So, I have this intuition of music that's in me as well. So, that was the moment when I realized, okay, I want to go back home and be a part of this movement, because I'm tuning the drums, I'm tuning the snare drum, the hi-hats, really getting into the drum machines. I didn't know anything about MIDI yet. So I would program the drum machine, and then I would literally play the bass lines by hand. I would have a pair of headphones on, and one in one ear, one in the other ear, the bass line in one ear and the drum machine in the other ear. And I felt it come together. And that is the moment when I felt that I want to go back home and be part of this movement, So I quit school.
Oh, wow.
If that's a good thing, I quit school and I came home, and it took me a while, but I bought my first drum machine. I bought my first keyboard that was a Juno 106. And that was pretty much the moment when I realized that, okay, this is where I want to go.
So it sounds like, I'll say this, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and it sounds like you had a very master and apprentice like relationship eventually with Derek May. and that he was someone that you learned a lot from. But how did that personal relationship kind of start? And is there anything I'm missing in this timeline, or is this kind of what came next?
No, well, at that moment when I came home from school and when I realized that I wanted to make music, I didn't know these guys yet. So I would make that weekly pilgrimage down to the club, and I would get down there and I would meet some friends. And then how I met Derek was through my ex-girlfriend. She introduced me to him, and I introduced myself to him, and I told him that, I make music, blah, 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 blah. Maybe you can, check it out and give me a little inspiration. He was like, okay. He was kind of just blowing hot air at that time. I'm sure he had plenty guys, but he was also doing his thing. So here I am, this young guy who had the fire in my eyes, though. So I took my music down to him on a cassette tape, and he listened to it. I'm thinking that, this was in the fall time when I came home, September. I'm thinking, yeah, I'm going to have my first release in December, 3 months later, not knowing anything about the business, not knowing what it is to create your sound and come with your own vision, program, and making sure you have your own voice when it comes to this music, because there's no vocals to it, so you got to be able to create your own voice with the music. So he listened to it. He's like, yeah, I like it. This is cool, but you could do better. And it just, my heart just dropped, and I'm like, what is this guy talking about? I'm thinking it's good. So he made me go back and work on it again. And at this time, he was traveling over to Europe. I was hanging out with Jay Denham, who was basically house sitting the studio, and he would invite me to come down to listen to one of his sessions and sort of be around the biggest studio, Transmat at the time, which is on Gratiot and in the Eastern Market area, which is, you had Transmat on the top floor, Model 500, which was Metroplex, which was Juan's label, downstairs, and then on the side of that was KMS Records. So you had, in one building, you had 3 studios that had 15 to 20 people in them on a daily basis. So you got this rotating, inspiration of guys coming in, making their music and being inspired by one another. And then I said to myself, okay, this is why he told me that I think I can do better, because you got all this creative energy down here. I need to feed off of that before I think that I'm ready to release a record, So I spent the night in the studios, and then I came back home. Then Derek came back home from his sessions in Europe, and I was using his equipment, and I came and he came and listened to some of my music, and he was like, okay, this is fine, but these are all of my sounds that you're using. So, you first off, you need to understand that, so he's basically giving me, and mentoring me to making sure that, I stand alone instead of sounding like someone else, So that was the more of the mentorship that he gave me, because he told me, he's like, you be an artist before anything. No one can take that away from you. Money will come, but being an artist, that's the number one thing that you want to be able to do, and have people appreciate you being an artist first and foremost.
So that's such a cool experience and such a cool learning opportunity. What was the first track that you had released, and how did you feel about it?
Well, okay. So the first track, my first solo track, was Kevin Steinerson put together a compilation album of different artists that were in the group, that was along in the studios. It was called Made in Detroit. And I submitted a track for that compilation album, so you would think that me being under Derek May's mentorship, I would release a track first from him. But this avenue with Kevin was a much better presentation because it was a compilation album, and this would be a way for people to hear about me or understand, not understand, but get to know me as a household name instead of releasing a project first. So all these baby steps led up to me having my first 12-inch, but Kevin Saunderson's Made in Detroit compilation that I did, and all I had was an 808 drum machine and a DX100 Roland and a Roland SH101 with the what was the mixer? The mixer was a Mackie 1604. So we talking about a studio that was no bigger than the length of my hands, you know, in the bedrooms, on the floor, sitting Indian style, making music. And that was the beauty of it too, because, you know, we didn't need big studios in order to make our music. This was all done in our bedrooms, in our lofts, sitting Indian style with the incense burning, with the mood lights, you know, and that was more fulfilling than being in a big studio. So the track was called Wave the Rave Goodbye, because it was at the time when the rave scene was on its way up in the US. You know, this was in 1991, I believe it was, when I did this track, and it was called Wave the Rave Goodbye. And it was a message, you know, because we're Detroit techno. We're not, you know, we're not ravers. We don't make rave music, you know. So that was my message to the people, Wave the Rave Goodbye. That was my first track.
Really cool. One thing that I'm learning in our conversation is, you know, in like texts, and if people like to get scholarly about techno, they refer to you as an artist of your generation as the second wave of Detroit artists. But I'm amazed to hear how closely inspired and under the mentorship you were under the, you know, the first wave of Detroit techno artists. It's really cool.
Yeah, that's, you know, before you hear about me, I had to start someplace, you know, and those guys already had their names, you know, pretty much plastered all over flyers and records and everything, you know. So this was the mentorship manifesting itself slowly, you know, years time before I would become a household name as well, you know. And that, you know, we all were we all wanted to put out records at that time, you know, but we had to be very careful on what we did, because we didn't want to flood the market, or we didn't want to, I wouldn't say flood the market, but we didn't want to do too much and sort of in the business today and gone today. You know, we wanted to, it was all about striving for longevity and having a vision. And, you know, when those guys started going over to Europe, it just sort of opened the doors for guys like me to release music that was on their labels that were sold in Europe. You know, I mean, you couldn't keep Detroit techno records in the stores at that time, you know? So, you know, me being the second part of the second generation was, it was more of an honor for me to be involved or into it with these guys, because, you know, you got to remember, I came from the college and I didn't know any of these guys, and they were already on their way, you know, to doing big things at that time as well.
When these artists started going to Europe for the first time, how eye-opening was that for you to hear? Or just like, did you believe it was possible for the rest of the entire world to embrace a sound coming from your city?
Yeah, because that's why I moved to Amsterdam, because once I realized that this music was being recognized globally, and me being in Detroit, you know, you don't really know if you being from Detroit, our families, other musicians, they had no clue on how we can go over to Europe and be recognized as these heroes to the club culture. And when I moved over to Amsterdam, I released my first EP, which was on Fragile Records, which was called Bango. And that was in 92 when I released it. In 93, I moved over to Amsterdam because I wanted to sort of understand what was going on, what was the connection with the people over there and the music that we were giving them. So I was going over there listening to what was going on outside of Detroit, sort of being a student of the music, but also teaching them about the Detroit techno sound. So it was good for me to go over there and see what was going on in the club scene, go to the record stores, read the magazines, meet people, meet these DJs who were playing our sound, but also the European techno. So I would go over there and listen to their European techno and listen to, okay, I like it, but this doesn't have any soul to it. And that's where Detroit techno came in, because we put more of the emotion, the soul, the creative aspect of and the experience of the Black experience into making music, which was also important because Black music and the rest of the world is considered the holy grail of music. Every time I get into a taxi or speak to someone who loves music, they speak about the Motown sound, some of the older people and how they used to listen to that music back in the days. And here I am, part of the second generation of Detroit techno. And I'm sort of getting that same response from people that's involved in our scene, like how much they love the music, they enjoy it. They can feel a sense of soul and creativity and struggle in our music. And that was basically when I realized that this music sort of took this global phenomenon and we just sort of went with it. And it's been a good ride ever since,
I mean, it's amazing to hear that. And we were just talking to Sander Kleinenberg, and I'm wondering if these histories are converging, because I think you guys are around the same age. Are you seeing people like Dimitri in the clubs and stuff like that?
We were playing parties with Dimitri. Yeah, of course. Yeah, because there was around the time they had three big DJs in Amsterdam at that time. We had DJ Remy, DJ Dimitri, and this other guy named Marcelo. And they all were club DJs. And they all had their crowds, and there was a competition, but they were on different nights, So Derek invited me to come over there to Amsterdam for 1 month. So my backtrack a little. So after I released my first release on his label, he gave me $500 in my pocket and a plane ticket to Amsterdam for a month. That was my introduction onto the European scene. So I got this plane ticket. I went over there. I had a couple of gigs. I went to these parties that these DJ Dimitri were playing at the Roxy, and I would see these people dancing. It was sort of like the Music Institute, but in Amsterdam, So got there, and all of a sudden, everyone wanted us, myself and Derek, to play these parties with them. So it was almost like DJ Ramy wanted us to play with him. Dimitri wanted us to play with him. Marcella wanted us to play with him. So it was almost like a feast on where, should we play with these guys? Should we play with these guys? But at the same time, it was all one scene, because it's such a small scene. So I wind up staying over there for a year and a half, which was supposed to be a month.
Oh, no way. That's awesome.
Right. So I'm like, okay, this is a perfect opportunity, perfect timing. The Dutch scene was really great. You had Outland Records, which was a label that had a very distinctive sound, and an artist that a visual artist that, released on each 12-inch. He would do a different work of art for each release, you know. So it was basically filling the pulse of what was going on over there. And, you know, still to this day, I can remember hearing and playing these big festivals of 3,000 and 4,000 people, which was the biggest crowd that I've ever played for in my life at that time. And just seeing how the crowd responded off of my music, the music that these other DJs were playing, and how much they were considered gods over there, and, you know, legendary status, if you will. And still to this day, those were some of the most influential parties in my life.
Were you, because I know Amsterdam is pretty centrally located, meaning like close to a lot of other cities with strong underground cultures. Were you traveling around at that time, or were you just in Amsterdam?
So my first action, you bring back memories over here now. Okay, so first time in Europe was Amsterdam. My very first DJ gig was in Basel, Switzerland.
Wow.
And this was a few days after I arrived in Amsterdam. And first time in Europe, you know, I'm traveling with my records. And make a long story short, I get to the gig in Basel, Switzerland, 3 hours late because there was fog in Amsterdam and I had records. So once you check the records in and there's delays and I arrived late, what do you guess happened? I arrived to the club without my records. Very first gig in Amsterdam, very first gig in Europe, I arrived to the club with no records. And I didn't know how to feel at that point, you know? So one of the DJs before me or after me let me use his records, you know? So here I'm playing these records. I don't know anything because most of them are European records. So I just go for the US labels because that was all I knew at the time, you know? So I'm playing these records and I'm train wrecking and I'm trying my best to do what I can. But at the same time, they're just like, oh, wow, we have this guy from Detroit here. You know, he's still doing his thing on my records, which is the DJ before me. He's like, he's still DJing with my records. So he, you know, I guess he's okay, you know, but, you know, it was needless to say, it wasn't my greatest gig, but, you know, I always tell the story that I arrived at my first party in Europe, in Switzerland with no records. You know, it wasn't the best gig, but the week after I played in Frankfurt with Derek, and it was the first time me being in Germany. And that was when I got a taste of the German techno.
Wow.
And that was a pretty eye-opening experience because we're talking about 140, 145 BPM. Wow. You know, at that time, you know, we were playing, you know, Detroit DJs, we were playing 132, 134, you know, and so it wasn't that slower, but when you hear things that fast, you understand why Detroit techno was so special, because making music, for me personally, making music that fast, you sort of become a robot. You don't really have any type of, there's no soul going into the machines. You sort of being, you know, you just going to tempo and just playing something that's, you know, energetic, you know. But for Detroit music, you know, we created music that was based on emotion. So therefore we had to slow it up a little and, you know, project our thoughts into it.
So did you, after your year and a half in Amsterdam, did you return to Detroit?
I did. So I have to say that, you know, I stacked enough money to come home and start my own, you know?
Oh, let's go. Let's hear about it. That's awesome.
Yeah. So after a year and a half, you know, I came home and I moved out my mom's house, got my own apartment, you know, started buying equipment a little, was independent, was still going around to see Kevin, Juan, and Derek. But I wanted to come home and start my foundation. You know, I wanted to, you know, have a foundation in Detroit, you know. Came home for 6 weeks. And then from that point, Derek told me, he was like, okay, well, at this point, you will be a traveling DJ. And that means you'll be traveling all over the world, doing your thing, you know, creating your fan base, creating your music, being an artist, you know, being your own boss. And that was more than what I can ask for, because I just remember wanting to wear t-shirts and blue jeans for the rest of my life and being my own boss. You know, we're coming, you know, Detroit, America, we come from some parts that are conservative, where you need to, you know, do things by certain rules, but then you have artists who just want to be free and create themselves. And that was when I realized that, okay, this is it's going to be on now. You know, this is where I'm going to be starting, beginning and continuing, and of those sorts. So I came home, started my foundation, you know, started my label a little bit long, you know, a few years later. And then
What was the label called?
what was that?
What was the label called?
Black Flag Recording.
Oh, that's Black Flag. Okay, cool.
Yep, Black Flag Recordings. I started Black Flag in 1997, which was 3 years later. But I wanted to make sure this was something that I wanted to do, because, you know, running a label, especially nowadays, but back then it was, you know, taking the going to the mastering place, getting them mastered, going to UPS, shipping the records all out, you know, invoices, getting in touch with the distributors ourselves, sometimes driving to Chicago, taking the records to the record stores. So this was all, you know, this is all, we did all this, you know. So this, I wanted to make sure that this was something that I wanted to do, and, you know, have someone, you know, to come along for the ride. So this was in 1997, but from that point on, traveling, I realized that, you know, I was a part of something bigger than myself, something bigger than just music. It was a movement. And, you know, me being considered part of the second generation, you know, I couldn't ask for anything more, because, you know, I could still remember mimicking these guys on my drum machines in Tennessee and not knowing anybody. So, you know, sometimes at that time, I, you know, had to pinch myself and make sure that is this really happening?
I want to ask you something that I think permeates underground music culture, and that is the use of pseudonyms. Because early in your career, you're releasing, to me, it seems like in my research, and it makes it kind of hard to go back and piece it all together, but you're releasing music under a bunch of different names. Is that you creatively kind of giving an identity to different projects, or what's that all about?
Well, that was what Detroit was all about. We was all, you know, Detroit was all about being mysterious, you know, being underground. That was the true essence of underground. Not, you know, releasing music and people not knowing who it is, you know, because you just want the music to speak for itself, you know. For me, and I'm sure the other guys, you know, we had so much music inside of us that we wanted to give certain parts of ourselves to certain pseudonyms, you know, like, you know, I started out with Bango. Bango was my first release on Derek May's Fragile label. And the reason why I did Bango instead of Stacey Pullen is because when I came to Derek with these tracks, he asked me, do you have any samples in it? And I'm like, yeah. He was like, okay, well, first of all, for Transmat, we don't accept sampled music. And, you know, I'm thinking, I'm like, wow, okay. So he's like, but I have another label that you can release on that we accept, well, I'm gonna say accept, but that we release music that based on, you know, if there's a sample in it, you know, to make a long story short. So that's when I created Bango, because it was based on samples of, and I was into African world music at the time. And I was listening to this artist called Babatula Olatunji, and it was a track called Drums of Passion. And I sampled that track, and Bango, which was almost like bongo, and there was a lot of bongos and percussions and congas. So that was that pseudonym. My Silent Phase album that I released on Derek May's label when I used to live in Amsterdam. The Theory of Silent Phase was based on music geared towards the house, or something that you can put along and clean the house, sort of soundtrack, non-dance floor music, if you will. Cosmic Messenger, which is another pseudonym that I released under, was geared toward more towards the dance floor, more techno. I did a track called Death March, which was inspired by me marching in the band, which I did all of my high school and my college years. I marched in marching band. We had this move called the cadence, called the Death March, and I wanted to sort of project a little bit of that into my music, because it was dance floor. It was, a group of people doing the same move at the same time. And so fast forward to my Stacey Pullen music now, which was sort of a little bit of all of those pseudonyms roll into one. And that's where we are right now. I probably will re-release some of those albums of those pseudonyms probably later on, or next year or something. But that is the logic behind pseudonyms, is because we had so many different aspects on how we wanted to approach music at any time of day, that sometimes it was different from what the music that we made yesterday.
Got it. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna jump a little bit ahead, because I saw in an interview, one thing I was interested about was you started a monthly night in Detroit called Radio School, and it was a monthly night. You'd bring in talent, but this is what you had to say about a residency. You said, "I want to have a residency in my home. I get to travel all over the world, but there's nothing like having a residency in the place you call home." What was this like Radio School night all about? And I don't know, what was it about? What were some good memories from it? Was it great? What was it about?
So when I started Radio School, the message was, we were anti-radio. Now, back then we wasn't. We were influenced by what's going on, but now, especially when you have the same songs on the radio 20 times a day, so we were anti-radio. So that was basically meaning that we were only going underground, playing songs that you didn't hear 20 times a day, and the school aspect of it was basically teaching people about, educating the masses on, my night, educating them about the music that wasn't coming to Detroit, educating them about what I've been inspired by traveling around the world, and being able to come home and give that music to them. And I started with another DJ who was more of a local DJ. So we kind of joined forces, because he had his crowd and I had my crowd too. But, I kind of wanted to sort of bring both of these crowds together to do a little something that hasn't been done before, And, we did Radio School, and we had a lot of success with it, going around to different venues. And at that time, the venues were kind of, it wasn't so many venues in Detroit at that time, and we're Detroit is a 2:00 a.m. city. So it was very difficult to sort of have a night at the same club every month, so we had to rotate it at different clubs, which was a challenge on its own, because, sometimes people want to, they want to have something that they can go to at the same club that and consider a residency. But if I'm having a residency and I'm traveling different clubs, it's like a traveling residency, so it's like a in-town circus show, if you want to say that, but so we did Radio School. I think this was around 2007. And I just wanted to give Detroit a little something that I was experiencing around the world and educating them in new music, because at this point, we got a total different generation of kids that went out when I first started. I was going out in Detroit in the 90s, that was considered with the rave scene and the baggy pants, when the pacifiers, if you will, And now we have a different generation of kids that, wanted something a little bit more snazzy or sophisticated, or a little bit grown folks, as we call it in Detroit. So we did it. We did a good time in radio school. I stopped it after a while because it was, I just wanted to do something else it run its course pretty much.
Totally. What do, I do so much research about like the origins and rise of your career that sometimes I forget to carry it all the way through to the present day. But what does kind of like 2010 to 2020 look like for you professionally?
I would say it was an interesting time because I saw the music shift a little. I saw the European scene take off. I mean, Berlin at that in particularly, started its minimal movement. Everything slowed up. BPM was more 120, 124 or slower. And, here I am, and here, Detroit guys, we want to feel that energy from the crowd. And when the minimal scene came around, it was sort of an eye opener. Like, what is this? I don't, I'm not a fan of it, but I'm not knocking it because I disrespect it. But at the same time, it just wasn't my scene. So it was an interesting time because, I would play parties in different places and still come with that Detroit mentality where I needed energy in order to get the party rocking. And on the flip side, the minimal scene was, being cool, being mellow, relaxed, and that was a conflict for me, and particularly at that point. But then festivals started, festivals were being branded a little more, and festivals were being branded in different countries. So I started playing festivals that was based on music in each, a tent that was based on this music, a tent that was geared towards this music. And that's what sort of opened it up a little bit more for me, particularly. And I was in Ibiza a few times at that, around 2011. And I started to, what should I say? I didn't release any music. It was just more of me DJing. And so I wanted to get more into making people dance versus being in the studio. I had a bad experience with the record label at that time, and I was kind of jaded about the industry. So I wanted to concentrate more on DJing. That was a big part of my 2010 to 2014. And then I restarted Black Flag. And that was when I started getting people to submit more music to my label, because at that specific time, I was only releasing music on my label. I wasn't accepting any artist submissions whatsoever. So 2012 is when I started getting artists for the label, being a proper label at that time. Me being A&R, listening to the tracks, still traveling a lot. But then, and then I got, I started playing gigs with guys like Local Ice and Marco Carolla. Nick Fanciulli, Luciano, and those guys were always big fans of Detroit. So it was kind of a natural progression for me to be playing for them because, you know, they were doing branded parties at the time. Marco was doing Music On, or Local Dice was doing his thing at Cocoon, and they were excited to invite this Detroit legend to play with them, to sort of give them, you know, a little bit of notoriety as well, you know, partnership or whatever you want to call it, and playing tracks with them and playing music and playing gigs and just sort of creating in the studio of that sort.
It's really cool because it sounds like throughout your career, one consistent thing has been educating people about the Detroit sound and then being receptive to new influences on the Detroit sound. Because what we heard when we saw you in Los Angeles was definitely a little bit of a blend of the two, where you could hear that like Nick Fanciulli, Marco Carolla sound in your Detroit bass. It was really cool.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's you know, music now, man. Music now has taken so many changes that, you know, as long as I'm still keeping my core values when it comes to DJing, you know, that's the most important. You know, I mean, I play a quote unquote Detroit techno set all the time, but I still come into each gig with that Detroit mentality. And that's what makes it a bit different because, you know, no one wants to go and hear the same style of DJs play the same music, you know? So me having that experience and that edge of being from Detroit, I have a different delivery in playing music versus the guys who I play with most of the time. And, you know, even to this day, you know, when I played that party in LA, it was, you know, I'm still going in with that Detroit mentality, even though, you know, you can still hear remnants of other influence genres into my set as well. You know, I mean, I've been doing this since, I mean, my Fabric CD that I released in, I can't remember, 2004, 2005, I did a Fabric compilation album for the club in London. And I did it, and it was a little Detroit, a little house, a little tech house, but I fused it together so well that, you know, people couldn't pinpoint it. You know, I had people coming up to me and it's like, yeah, it's a little bit of that. I can't really classify it. I'm like, I did my job then.
Yeah.
Classify it, you know.
It's cool. Been to Fabric. It's amazing. Thank you for highlighting that mix because there's always something our viewers are like, you should have asked about that. And that definitely would have been something that I missed. So thank you for bringing it up.
Oh, and my first mix that I did for Essential Radio.
Oh, nice.
Pete Tong. I did one in 1996 and I had 2 hours. And I can remember still compiling and mixing that for him. And I remember the first hour, he's like, you got 2 hours, the first hour and then the second hour. And I automatically went into thinking, I'm like, okay, the first hour is like the warm up of a club. You know, you playing vocals because, you know, Detroit's, you know, I still come from house music. I come from disco. You know, I come from Black music where you hear vocals. So I'm gonna put some of that into the music. It's not just about being straight techno all the time. So, I mean, some of the best DJs who were never known outside of Detroit played, you know, house music that was vocals, gospel, whatever, you know. So I still had that influence in my mixes. And so when I did the Essential mix, you know, I started out very smooth and, you know, club opening. And then the second hour is when the Detroit techno came out of me, which was perfect because it would get a chance to showcase me on one of the top radio shows in the world with Pete Tong in England at the beginning of my career, and I still have people message me every now and then to say that I still listen to your mix. It's such a timeless mix, and and I'm happy that I've been able to create that at that time.
We're going to definitely throw the link to that mix in the description of this interview video, because I'm so stoked to, show my friends this mix and to have people watch this video.
And mind you, I did another mix in 2011, and Pete Tong, he was like, you're one of few people who've done 2 essential mixes. So yeah.
It's awesome.
had to.
Yeah, it's cool. And then you get to go back like 20 years later, or a little less than 20 years, and showcase how far you've come on your musical journey. I have a really important question for you, because I know there's Movement Festival, which I think started as Detroit Electronic Music Festival, but my question is, travel is such a core of underground dance music, traveling to different places. For people like us who love to travel and learn about the history of cities through their underground dance music scene, where are some places in Detroit that techno fans can go and check out to learn about the history of the genre?
Now, specifically now, you mean?
Yeah, like, the world's opening up again post-pandemic and people can travel again. If someone's going to Detroit, what should they check out?
Well, it's funny because I get asked this question, and whenever someone asks me about how is Detroit, what's the scene like, what clubs, what's going on? And I tell them the same thing. It's very still small here. Outside of the Movement Festival that happens, before the pandemic. Outside of that, there's a club called TV Lounge, which is a place where I have my residency still to this day. I play there 4 times a year. TV Lounge is a place where it's a club where they bring in the acts. We call it like our DC-10 and Ibiza, because it's got that type of vibe to it. And when you go there, it's the music, it's the people, it's the staff, it's gonna be dope, So TV Lounge is one place that you can go to. Then there's another place called the Marble Bar, which is also, it just came out. It started doing parties maybe 5 to 6 years ago. Marble Bar is, they have an outdoor patio. They do a lot of local things, but the local things they do are very well put together, because you still have that outlook of local talent that needs to be heard. And they do a very well job of putting on shows there. And then you have a few other places called the Russell Industrial Center, which is a warehouse, but now you're talking, almost illegal because the cops don't know about it, But the other 2 places I mentioned, those places were, legit clubs, But then you go to the after hours places, and you got this big place called the Russell Industrial, which they do parties there. They go after hours, but you still kind of have to be careful, because they could get shut down, then and then they could go on, so it depends on the vibe. But they mainly go off without a hitch, but still you have to have that you have to think about that in the back of your mind. Other than that, there are not too many other places. And people people think that, Detroit's this big scene, when it's really not. It's still fairly underground, other than us having parties at during Movement Weekend, there are a few other clubs that may open up for gigs, but not every week. That, if someone is coming through the Michigan or Detroit area, they may open the club for that night, but it's not a weekly thing. It's just a venue that is there and used when you can use it. So that's the ironic thing about Detroit. It's not really that much going on. more than what people think.
Is the Music Institute still standing as a building even? Like, is it possible to go and take a picture of it or something like that?
Yeah, it's not still standing. It's just basically a storefront.
Got it. Wow. Yeah.
You know, I mean, downtown Detroit is connected to, I mean, now, especially Detroit's going through this whole gentrification phase. It's just now, I think next door to it is a pizza joint. Next door to it is a restaurant. It might be, and I think it still may be vacant up in, you know, the next door of that, you know, so it's still there. It's not a standalone building, but, you know, I pass by it every now and then. And every time I pass by it, I just sort of, you know, take a moment of silence and like, you know.
It's really cool because, like, you know, the warehouse in Chicago is now a lawyer's office. And it's of my opinion that these places should be memorialized in some way, or at least a museum in these cities be dedicated to celebrating the importance of the roots of the music there.
Well, we do have the Detroit Historical Museum.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Detroit Historical Museum, and it may still be an exhibit on Detroit. I went there earlier this year, and they had an exhibit, and I submitted my first drum machine that I bought, and I submitted it to the museum. So I remember going there earlier this year, and it was, you know, still there. And so you have this place called the Detroit Historical Museum that has been just sort of displaying classic musical pieces or equipment, flyers, records, memorabilia, posters, autographs on the Detroit scene. So you do have that there, but as far as buildings wise, yeah, that might be a little difficult, especially since Detroit's going through this whole gentrification phase right now, you know?
Definitely. Well, I think my last question will be, music is such a spiritual thing, but when it comes to underground music, there's a physical element in it where you're going and you're dancing all night. And you are literally sweating, and it's a physical workout, and you're letting go. Now, in your bio, it says that you're vegan, and we're also vegan, and we're really inspired. You know, when we see that from a DJ, where did that decision to kind of, like, what was that decision about? And can you talk a little bit as we close this out about, like, staying healthy as a DJ, putting yourselves in these party atmospheres, but living a healthy, balanced lifestyle, especially being vegan? It's impossible for me to try and be vegan outside my kitchen where it's easy. But once you go out into the world, it's hard because you don't have all your things right there. But yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? I think you have a unique perspective.
Yeah. So, me being vegan, it started back in the 90s when I used to hang out with my Muslim brothers back in the days, you know, and they always used to tell me, don't eat swine, don't eat pig, you know, pork, you know, that was the number one thing. So I stopped eating pork, and then eventually I stopped eating red meat. So at that point in time, I was only eating chicken, fish, seafood, you know? So fast forward to years later, when it came time for me to sort of understand what I'm putting in my body, you know, I switched to vegan, and it wasn't that big because it wasn't that big of it. I wouldn't say it wasn't that contrast because I was only eating chicken and fish at that time, you know, and I haven't been eating pork and red meat for 25, 30 years now. Even though I have to say that eventually, like occasionally when I go down to South America, back in the days, I would go to Brazil and eat the red meat or whatever. So when it came time to me being a little bit more health conscious about myself, the environment, the animals, switching over to vegan wasn't that big of a contrast because I was already halfway there. You know, me being healthy and staying on the road and making sure I get a workout in is is important for a DJ's mentality, physically and mentally, because you spend so much time traveling, planes, trains, automobiles, hotels, clubs, you know, and you don't really get a chance to you spend most of the time sitting down traveling, you know? So I wanted to, you know, give back to my body a little bit more than just, you know, music, if you will. So when I switched vegan to vegan diet, it was based on me wanting to be healthy first. And because there was, you know, they've been so many documentaries and information out there that makes you want to change your perspective on how you live and being conscious of the environment. And, you know, especially my culture, the Black community, you know, we suffer a lot with diabetes, high blood pressure, cholesterol, and all those sorts. And, you know, and I didn't want to fall in that category. You know, just because they say it's hereditary or it runs in your family doesn't mean that I can still be susceptible to it, you know, if I treat my body right, you know, and I've always been health conscious about what I put in my body, even if it was, you know, taking vitamins on a daily basis, even if it was going to the gym and doing cardio for 20 minutes, you know, even if it was just, you know, going to the grocery stores and doing a fast for 5 days with just fruits and vegetables, you know, you know, and then when you're coming out of that fast and you feel like a brand new person. And I felt that it was just time for me to, you know, live another half of life of being conscious of what I put in my body. A struggle to travel, especially when you're traveling to, like I was in Peru and Costa Rica, or specifically like South American countries, when, you know, meat is such a big part of their culture and diet. You know, it's difficult because sometimes you get into the hotel room and all you can do is order French fries and salad. You know, and I make sure I travel with my protein shakes and, you know, my different supplements to help balance it out. But, you know, it's a lot of just.
It's also part of the culture down there. Like, I'm not one to be like closed off to anything, and when it, like, you know, meets such a center part of the culture, it's all good to like go in and dabble a little bit and enjoy that part. So yeah, but yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I learned so much. You opened my head up and put Detroit music history in it, and I'm so stoked now to go back and listen to the original records, listen to your work, listen to Derek, Kevin, Juan. It's going to be awesome. But yeah, thank you, Stacey. This was great.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me, and we speak soon.